Hello and welcome to, boy, it seems like it's been a while, guys. Hello and welcome to AAI, the podcast on analytics and the business of sports. I'm Phil, and with our post-holiday, but right in the heart of playoffs and right in the heart of what's going on in the sports betting industry, say hello to the two A's behind the AAI. Hi, Andrew. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Phil.
And hello, Ari. Good to see you.
Great to see you. It's great to be back, and Happy New Year and everything to our listeners.
Andrew Ari has one of the images of the weekend, the end zone slime that we had a lot of fun with before we started recording from the Saints and Bears. Successful venture, not without stubbing their toe a little bit, but successful venture for the NFL. But guys, we're going to lead off with our lead story that we think has a chance to be the biggest story of the year in sports. And Andrew, that goes right to your wheelhouse. That's sports betting about to just bust free, bigger than big, in the biggest city of all, the Big Apple, New York City, and the state of New York. Take us through what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, this is really interesting, and it has to be scaring New Jersey quite a bit. I mean, over the course of the fall, we spent a lot of time talking about how New Jersey was just hammering it in terms of their sports book and online betting last year. And New York was clearly looking at that and anxious to bring some of that money back home. So New York is ready for online sports betting. And they're legalizing sports betting at their casinos, or they legalized it at their casinos, but not online. And it wasn't producing very well, just about $14 million when people had to go into the sports books. People just went to New Jersey. But they were thinking at least 20% of the New Jersey handle was actually coming from New York residents. And so they're opening up for online sports betting, thinking they could be looking at $1 billion a month handle, over 20 billion a year for New York, which is just huge. It's just going to, dwarf many of the other states.
Ari, you grew up in New Jersey, so you think of, that market's going to be segmented, but you live in Chicago now, and Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, and that brings us to Iowa closing the books on a remarkably, in fact, a record prosperous 2020 for the sports books in Iowa. Take us through it.
Yeah, they closed on a record pace of the Iowa sports book, over $100 million in bets just the last month, December 2020. So that's reaching like $600 million for the year. It's, we talked about the Midwest being big, and you could see it continue to grow. And now Iowa is actually the seventh largest market in the U.S. With COVID, in-person registrations gone, so the monthly handle should grow. So it's huge. Iowa became the 8th state to surpass $100 million in wagers in a single month. So that, with all the other business, 7.5 million in net receipts. And that's great for the state for tax-wise, over 500,000, 508,000 in state taxes.
And that will keep the theme on sports betting. The Drone Racing League made big news this week, Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been seeing these tie-ups between many different leagues, but the Drone Racing League created a tie-up with DraftKings as their sports betting partner. They just completed their Allianz World Championship season this Saturday, and the DraftKings app was accepting bets on races in Colorado, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Tennessee, and West Virginia. They've also secured a multi-year betting data collection deal with Genius Sports, because if you're going to begin betting on these things professionally, you better be getting the data you need and everything. What's interesting is we've been talking about the impact of some of the newer sports, e-gaming and such, on the traditional sports. DraftKings suggested that 70% of the drone racing fans don't follow Big Five sports. But they're 3 times more likely to bet than the Big Five sports fans would be.
I like how, I mean, it's super big, New York. It's somewhat unexpected, Iowa, the seventh largest market. It's evolving with esports and drone racing. And Ari, it's playing to your strength from your work at Nielsen. It's going into a TV provider in a really unique way.
Yeah, the Fubo Television, they're acquiring the sports book company Victory, not Victory, but with a G, Victory. And Fubo TV is about 6 years old. It streams international soccer into the American market. So I personally love drone racing, virtual reality, but yeah, getting that internet television continues to get into the sports arena.
There is something interesting about this. I mean, right, Fubo started just bringing the international soccer in, but it's grown to be for cable cutters in general. I'm more interested in Victory because they're buying a company that isn't actually taking bets at this moment. They're licensed in Iowa, but they haven't launched. They're pursuing licenses in a bunch of other states, but haven't yet received them. On the other hand, they've got really good executives. Their top executives came from BetMGM. So they know the business. It's an interesting tie-up, though.
I'm fascinated by it because it's so vast and so big and accelerated by what's happened globally over the last year and with the pandemic. NFL playoffs, really fascinating. Couple of 40-something, couple of old guys. Drew Brees, Tom Brady, and boy, they both looked sharp last weekend too, displaying their future Hall of Fame cred. You know, they cracked me up. I mean, I had to go watch their. I mean, I was in network sports when both those guys broke in. I can remember when when Brees was the quarterback at Purdue and Brady was the quarterback at Michigan. But what's interesting about that, watching them, I just had to go. I said, he's 43, Brady. He's 42. Brees turns 42 later this week. We're recording on a Wednesday. It's like watching, it's surreal. It's like watching throwback video in real time. And if you watch their two performances this past weekend, Brady had real zip on super tight spirals. He looked great. And, you know, the same thing with Brees. Brees was not only out thinking, as you would think with his savvy, but he was also out playing. He looked great. He put the ball right where he wanted it. And it's amazing to see the two of them perform. They go head to head. The Saints have won the two regular season matchups. They're favored by 3.5. Now, we'll go through the others, and we're going to give the line. Rams play at Green Bay, Pack favored by a touchdown. In the AFC, Ravens at Buffalo, and boy, the Bills took advantage of Colts' mistakes last week. Bills are giving 2, so under a field goal. And in Cleveland, everybody loves Cleveland. At Kansas City, the defending Super Bowl champs, favored by 9.5. Now, Andrew, you pointed this out to me, a real oddity in that one player jumps from one of the teams to the other during the playoffs. Go ahead and explain.
Yeah, absolutely. So an offensive tackle, Jared Veldheer, had played with Green Bay in prior seasons and was cut. He was signed by the Indianapolis Colts to their practice squad prior to the playoffs, like a month ago. And because of injuries, he actually played for the Indianapolis Colts in their loss to the Bills, as we talked about last week. But he was never taken off the practice squad, which means he was still eligible for any team to sign him. Green Bay has had a number of injuries to their offensive line. He was already familiar with their offense. And so they signed him to put him on the roster for this week. So this is going to be the first time in league history a guy will play on 2 different teams during the same playoffs.
Amazing. And then, Ari, we'll go back to your TV Nielsen days. Cleveland scored huge in that Sunday night game. Tell us a little bit about that, and then some other TV ins and outs as we look over your shoulder at what possibly could be the most explosive, biggest NFL game. Having those two guys, the two old guys, they've had a lot of fun with this meme. where they both are great. It's the History Channel. But take us through what happened with Cleveland and then some of the winners and losers of the season, because there's news there.
Sure. So Cleveland Browns, haven't won much in long, long time. Pittsburgh, traditional powerhouse. So the huge anticipated game, and the ratings were through the roof. It actually was the highest rated prime television show on the station since last year's Super Bowl, actually. And then, drawing on that, some facts and figures from the NFL broadcast, there was a slight decrease in viewership, about 7%. Wasn't really as bad as feared, given the NFC big market clunkers we've seen.
Oh, God. I mean, think of that, guys. Giants and Jets, right? We can go right down. Patriots in Boston, Giants and Jets. Help me geographically here, Ari. Philadelphia Eagles, Washington Redskins. None of those teams performed this year. Imagine if they're just average or, on the fringe, let alone in the hunt. So really not as bad as feared. What else you got?
Yeah, the NFL had 20 of the top 25 telecasts for the year. And then NBC's Sunday Night Football finished as primetime's top show for the 10th straight year. But the games were outdrawn by the late afternoon Fox and CBS games.
Is that a surprise to you that the late afternoon West Coast it's 4:00 game on the East Coast, 1:00 game West Coast? Is that a surprise to you that those two games on Fox and CBS outdraw NBC Sunday night or ESPN Monday night? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I would just say a little bit of a surprise, but like with COVID and people, like everyone's internal clocks, work, leisure schedule, kind of a little bit off. So yeah, while it's a break from tradition, not terribly surprising.
Well, and the NFL makes a big deal out of, and it's a lot of fun. It's tradition, the Thanksgiving games, but Santa Claus is going to have company on Christmas for your next tidbit.
Yeah, that's right. The Fox Christmas game between Minnesota and New Orleans attracted 20.1 million viewers. That's the most watched Christmas Day program since 2016.
Yeah. Next NFL news, The Insider. In fact, he's an insider in several areas. What a life. Let's take this through. Andrew, you take the part about he was the insider getting the Raiders to Las Vegas. And then, Ari, you go ahead and weigh in as well. Let's take the next news item. You guys tell me about it.
Yeah. Well, what I would actually say is an insider across all of the things we talk about here, from sports to gaming, passed away at 87 over the weekend from complications to cancer. Sheldon Adelson, who you may say is one of the people who reinvented Vegas in the 90s by buying the Sands, creating the Sands Convention Center, and then ultimately tearing down the Sands and building the Venetian. And then took that Vegas experience to Macau as the first person to really bring up Vegas to Macau and to Singapore. But as you said, also was a key player in bringing the Raiders to Las Vegas. So a huge figure in gaming in particular passed away this weekend.
Large and small, Ari. I mean, estimated to be worth $29.8 billion, but he had a touch. He had a heart for a couple of things, and that speaks to one of your interests as well.
Yeah, well, he helped, in addition, across sports, the Raiders move, but also the Israeli team World Baseball Classic and Olympic, bid, which is a whole nother topic, but, the Olympics 2021. But yeah, he was a big supporter of Israel and sports in Israel and sports really around the world. Political donor on both sides in a way, but certainly a figure around the world on so many different levels.
It's college football. Alabama this year and LSU the year before put together back-to-back powerhouse offenses, and Heisman Trophy winners to claim the NCAA championship. I was more impressed with LSU a year ago, but Devontae Smith, slight frame receiver, just remarkable what he did in the first half. Joe Burrows, we tip our cap to him as well. They're both dominant and a real tough act to follow. College football struggled. The playoffs were not legitimate, but they got through the virus and they were able to play games, but they have some house cleaning to do. We'll put it that way. Let's go back to the month of November and some sports betting. Andrew, let's talk about the state of Colorado.
Yeah, we've spent time talking about other states, but it's always nice to come back and talk about it's not just the states we are talking about. Colorado saw over $230 million in wagers in the month of November. Many of those were you'd expect, 88 million in the NFL. I'm actually a little surprised it was only 22 million in college football. I would have expected that to be closer to the NFL. The one I love was $12.4 million were wagered on table tennis. And I know you can wager on anything, but I just find it hard to believe there are that many people following it closely enough.
See, that's what you get on AAI that you don't get on Sports Center or any of the debate shows on Fox and all of that. Table tennis. People were really
covering it now.
Yeah.
I don't have enough hours in the day.
There's been some good comedies on table tennis sports, competitive.
Well, all right. You're speaking up. Let's go right back into, and let's stay with that theme in Major League Baseball. The Nationals are at the leading edge.
Yeah. So one of the themes we've been talking about is betting and then legalizing it on sports and then having it possible at stadiums. Well, the Washington Nationals have really cut a deal for BetMGM, the big MGM, their betting branch, to open a sports book at the park this coming season. And there's a lot of ins and outs with that of how do you regulate it, but it's a deal. It includes a mobile sports betting app that you could function within 2-block radius of the stadium.
I wonder what Pete Rose thinks about that. Has that changed, Ari, has that changed your mind about Pete Rose in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, well, my mind was the Hall of Fame, that he should be in it, that the Hall of Fame is an educational museum. So absolutely he belongs in it. And then, being employable by baseball is a different topic, but yeah, for sure being in the Hall of Fame. And then this, by comparison is, tilts the needle of, kind of grandfathering him in a little bit of, not the right word, but, making what he did in the past closer to what is freely done now also helps push in the direction for being in the Hall.
Andrew, that changed your point of view?
I don't know. I'm troubled by the rapid adoption of these betting companies to the sport venues and the sports teams. I wonder what the long-term consequence is. I have a problem that Pete Rose bet on his team, right? And potentially change the nature of his decisions. In fact, he may not have consciously made different decisions because he bet on some games versus others, but I'm sure he did change. We're just human after all. That's troubling. I'm actually more worried going forward. I like Ari's argument about the Hall, that it really should be about what he did on the field. And there's no question what he did on the field was good enough to be in. But I'm more troubled about what is this going to set for the future and what are people going to think going forward, independent of what ultimately happens with Pete Rose. Although, to be honest, I think this actually leads into the next story, because there's a reason teams are looking for revenue sources, isn't there?
Well, jump right in there. You bet.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something I've been wondering for a long time, is how long would we see continually rising TV contracts? And I'm going to say that this one has a huge caveat around it. And Phil, I think you should give that caveat because of your experience with ESPN. But ESPN is cutting back in their contract with Major League Baseball, not offering as much. And they're even leaving some outs for them to sell games they had originally purchased. And, Phil, I know you have some opinions about ESPN. I'll let you give that. But I mean, this is a question as we see fewer and fewer people subscribing to cable. It becomes harder and harder for cables to justify increasing the cost because it just drives more people to cut the cable. And we're even seeing, we talked about Fubo TV. You can watch sports on Fubo TV, but many of those are not paying for like regional sports networks anymore because they see it as too expensive for their process. So it's interesting to see if this is some sort of representation of what's to come, or if this is really an ESPN problem plus a global pandemic problem, and things will return to normal as soon as the world returns to normal. But there is some additional issues with ESPN, I know.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's a harbinger of things to come yet. The sky's not falling on Major League Baseball. ESPN has big challenges right now. And in, I'd say over the last 10 to 15 years, they've really they're a good clearance partner for inventory, to use some industry terms, but rarely have they been a good business partner for Major League Baseball in the past 10 to 15 years. Because the news programs are manufactured to talk more often about the NFL, regardless of whether the merit of that information that's being talked about. And to most of the company, ESPN Sunday Night Baseball equated to, especially since the ascension of the Red Sox, it was obviously the Twins against the Rockies that everybody tuned in regularly to watch. But it became Yankees and Red Sox, right? And of course, when it wasn't the Yankees and Red Sox, it was the Red Sox and the Yankees.
No, they did sometimes break it up. You did occasionally get to see the Dodgers.
And that's a valid criticism. I know the guys at Fangraphs have gone around and around about that, and they've tried to do the same thing to balance out their coverage analytically over the last couple of years, because it's true. And when I worked for ESPN, and I'd get the call to do that week's story, clearly, it was, we're promoting our product. And that's it. And they've been a very good partner for the NFL, but not as much for Major League Baseball. So sky's not falling. And besides, the Fox and Turner deals recently are more than just ample evidence, not just my opinion, of that. Now, guys, we're about out of time, so I want to jump down to League of Legends and the pandemic impact. Ari, take it away.
Sure. League of Legends, Undisputed Heavyweight. I personally play that a little bit, but play Field Runner Attacks, so I can see how addicting it is. But they generate a ton of money. Almost their flagship title alone, produced by Riot Games, 1.75 billion with a B revenue in 2020. It's most by any non-mobile free-to-play game. Free-to-play meaning free to start, and then you pay for in-game, add-ons. Number 6 for free-to-play games overall, including mobile. So Honor Kings, 2.45 billion. Peacekeeper Elite, 2.3 billion. Roblox, 2.2 million. Free Fire, 2 billion. Pokemon Go used to be number 1, now at 1.9 billion. And just for context, the overall video game industry, just the free-to-play games, is 78% of the industry's revenue. So big resurgence for the League of Legends. It kind of been up and down over the past multiple years, but 1.75 billion, that's some real money. And it's in line with the huge growth of the whole video gaming industry. It's expected to rise 20% year over year to 175 billion. That's what expected when we wrap up the numbers. and there's a lot of playing parts. Facebook acquisition of Oculus and virtual reality is growing, but 175 billion, 20% growth, doesn't look like it's stopping.
You said, you used the word the numbers, or the phrase the numbers, and we are all about the numbers. And we're all out of time. It's good to be back with you guys. Appreciate that. Enjoy the break for the holidays. Good to be back at it. And fellas, this is, what we just, NFL, business of television, sports betting all over the planet, drone racing league, and then gamers at the end. That's the pandemic is shifting the shape of things. And what we just talked about for the last 20, 30 minutes is an example of that. Andrew, Ari, thanks for hanging out with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It's always enjoyable.
Ari just changed us to slime again there. It'd be fun to see when they do that again, as we surely will. Thank you for hanging out with us. We appreciate that. Again, this is AAI, the podcast about analytics and the business of sports. We'll see you again next week.